Vial. You, alone. The wren stair. Third bell. Bring no one. Captain Austrian did not look at him when he said it. He looked at the brass of the gate latch, and the rain bowing the lamps along the colonnade, and he held a folded paper between two fingers, as if it were something he had picked up by accident. Michael Vale, 3 weeks sworn into the Royal Guard of Harrowmere, came to attention so sharply his bearskin caught the lamp. "Sir." "You heard me." "Yes, sir. The wren stair. Third bell. Alone." "Bring no one," Austrian repeated, and turned away. The two senior guardsmen at his elbow, Hask and Donre, both men who had stood at this gate longer than Michael had been alive, did not turn with him. They stood with their faces forward and their hands at the seam of their cloaks, and they did not look at Michael either. A cold thing went through him. Not fear, exactly. The understanding that whatever the captain had just asked of him, Hask and Donre had been asked of it already, and had been excused, and were grateful. He let none of it onto his face. He held salute until Austrian was inside the warder's lodge, and then he carried his post back to the post he had been pulled from, and he did not look at Hask, and Hask did not look at him. The wren stair lay on the riverside of the palace, behind the chapel, where the old wall came down to the water in 3 crooked landings. It was a service stair. Maids used it, coal carts used it. Ministers did not. The captain of the Royal Guard certainly did not send a sworn man there alone at the third bell with a folded paper and that voice. Michael was the third son of a country knight from the Chalk Hills, 2 days' ride north. His father had 3 sons and a manor that could feed one. The 2 elder brothers had taken the manor and the marriage and the better blade between them, and the youngest had been sent south to the only profession a third son in Harrowmere had a name in, the Royal Guard. He had ridden in expecting a barracks of brothers, and had found, in the 3 weeks since the oath, something stranger and quieter men who looked through each other in the corridors and only met eyes in the duty room, late, when the door was shut. He had not understood it. He thought he might be about to. The bell of the inner watch went at first, then second. He was relieved at the half. He went to the duty room and unbuckled his cloak in the slow, careful way of a man who is being watched without being looked at. Hask was at the long table polishing his carbine with a rag that did not need to be there. Donre was at the window. Sergeant Pell, who had taken Michael in hand on his first day, and shown him how the collar pinned without the pin biting, was at the brazier with his back to the room. "Sergeant," Michael said low. Pell did not turn. "Eat something, lad. Bread's on the board." "Sergeant, I have an order at third bell. The wren stair. Alone." The carbine in Hask's hands stilled. Donre, at the window, leaned the smallest fraction of his weight onto his left foot, which was the way a careful man set himself before he spoke. Neither spoke. Pell turned then. He was a square man with a soft face and very clear eyes, and the look he gave Michael was not the look of a sergeant to a recruit. It was the look of a father whose son has come home with the news he had been afraid of for a year. "Third bell," Pell said. "Yes, sergeant." From the captain himself. "Yes." Pell closed his eyes for the space of a slow breath. When he opened them, he said, "Go to the stair. Carry the paper. Do exactly what the paper says, and not one thing more." "Sergeant, what is on the stair?" "Lad," Pell said quietly, "if I tell you, you will refuse it, and I will spend the rest of my service knowing I let a sworn man become an oath-breaker on his 4th week." Hask put the rag down. Donre took his weight off his left foot. The room understood something it would not say. "Sergeant," Michael said, and his own voice had gone steady in a way he did not entirely recognize, "if it is something Hask and Donre have already been asked, and have already been excused, then I am not the man you should send." Pell looked at the floor. "It is something they were asked. It is something I was asked. We were, all of us, asked at our own third's bells, lad, and the older you are, the louder the no is in your throat. You are 3 weeks in. You have not built the no yet. That is why he picked you. Then I will build it now." "No," Pell said, and his voice was nearly tender. "You will not. You will go down to the wren stair at the third bell with the paper, and you will do what is written there and not one thing more. And when you come back up, I will be in this room with a bowl of something hot and a chair pulled out, and we will say nothing about it, and tomorrow you will be a Royal Guard of Harrowmere who has carried his first hard order. That is the only road that ends with you still wearing the cloak." Michael looked at him a long moment. Then he looked at Hask. Hask, who had 3 children and a wife in a riverside cottage and 22 years in the Guard, met his eyes for the first time all evening. There was an apology in them so old it did not need a word attached. "What is on the paper, sergeant?" "I do not know." "Have you ever known?" "Once." "And?" Pell did not answer. He picked up the bread on the board and tore off a piece and put it in Mikhail's hand and folded Mikhail's fingers around it. "Eat. Bell's coming." Mikhail ate the bread because his sergeant had put it in his hand. He buckled his cloak, he took down his carbine and checked the action and put it back. He took down his saber and checked the loose ring on the chap, which he had been meaning to fix, and decided it could fix itself. At the door he stopped. "Sergeant, lad, if the paper says to do an unjust thing, I will not do it." Pell did not turn. Hask did not turn. Donray did not turn. But Donray, at the window, said, very softly, like a man speaking to the river, "Good." Mikhail stepped out into the rain. The Wren stair was 3 landings of whetstone going down to the river dock. A single lantern burned in an iron cage at the 2nd landing. Below the 3rd landing, the water moved against the wall in slow black plates. There was a covered skiff tied to the lower bolt. There were 2 men in plain coats standing on the lowest landing. There was a 3rd man kneeling between them with his hands bound and a sack over his head and his shoulders shaking with what Mikhail at first took for cold and then, on the second look, knew was weeping. Mikhail came down the 1st landing in the dark cadence, the regiment used for a watch march. The 2 plain-coated men did not turn. They had been told who was coming. On the 2nd landing he stopped. He took the folded paper from his cuff. He angled it under the lantern and read it. The paper said, "Hand him to the boat. Ask no name. Return alone." 3 lines. The captain's hand, the captain's seal. Mikhail folded the paper, put it back in his cuff, came down the last landing. "Guardsman," said the larger of the 2 plain coats. He had the careful, low voice of a man who had done unkind things in service of careful men. "You are early." "On time." "Quicker then, the boat is waiting." The kneeling man's shaking had stopped. He had heard the boots. He had recognized them. Bearskin boots on a wet stone made a sound nothing else in Harrowmere made. The man was holding his breath. Mikhail knelt down to him. The plain coat to his right made a small sound in the throat, a warning. Mikhail ignored it. He laid one white-gloved hand on the bound man's shoulder, gentle, the way a man lays a hand on a frightened horse. "Sir," Mikhail said, "I am a sworn man of the Royal Guard. I am going to lift the sack a finger's breadth so I can see your face. I will not take it off." He lifted the sacking. The face beneath it was thin and gray and rain-streaked and old. A clerk's face. A man Mikhail had passed twice in the long corridor of the records office on errands for the duty room. A man who had once smiled at him and called him young Vael, and asked after his hand of the saber. A senior clerk of the audit. A man whose books had, 3 days ago, become the only books that mattered in the kingdom. The clerk looked up at him with no surprise in his face at all, only a terrible patient sorrow, as if he had been waiting to find out which young man, exactly, the captain would send. "Vael," the clerk whispered. "Lad, whatever it says, do not." Mikhail lowered the sack. He stood. He turned to the plain coats. "This man is going back up the stair with me." The larger plain coat closed his hand on the hilt of a short blade in his belt. He did not draw it. He only let the closing be seen. "Guardsman, the paper." "I read the paper." "Then you know." "I read the paper," Mikhail said again. "It is signed in the captain's hand. It is sealed in the captain's seal. It is not lawful. The Royal Guard of Harrowmere does not put bound men on boats without a name in a writ and a magistrate's mark. The captain knows this. That is why he sent a man 3 weeks sworn and not a man 20 years sworn. He needed a guardsman who did not yet know the difference between an order and a crime." The plaincoat said, very quietly, "Boy, you will die on this stair." "Possibly," Mikhail said, "but I will die a sworn man. Step aside." The other plaincoat moved his hand to his coat. Mikhail moved first. He did not draw the saber. He stepped forward inside the second man's reach, took the wrist with his left hand, turned it the way Sergeant Pell had spent a quiet half-hour showing him in the courtyard last week, and put the man on his knees on the wet stone with his own blade still sheathed. Then he stepped back, hand on his own hilt, and waited for the larger one to decide. The larger one was a thinking man. He thought. A long, slow second passed. The rain came down on the lantern and hissed. The river moved against the wall. Somewhere out on the black water, a heron complained. The lantern flame ducked once in the wind and came back. "You are wearing a sworn cloak," the larger plaincoat said at last, almost to himself, "over a thing that is not a sworn order. Yes, you will be broken for this either way. Then I will be broken on the right side of it." The plaincoat looked at his companion on his knees on the stone, and at the clerk crouched between them, and at the lantern, and at the boat. He drew a slow breath through his nose. A bell rang behind them, not the watch bell. A smaller, brighter bell, very high, very far. Mikhail knew that bell only from his oath day. It was the bell of the inner hall. Boots on the stair above. A great many boots in the regiment's cadence. Mikhail did not turn his head. He kept his eyes on the larger plain coat and his hand on his hilt and his weight on the balls of his feet. Sergeant Pell came down first. Behind him, Hask. Behind Hask, Donray. Behind Donray, 8 men of the duty room Mikhail had not yet learned the names of. Behind the 8, Captain Ostrin himself, bareheaded, in his greatcoat, with the face of a man walking to a thing he should have walked to an hour earlier. Pell came down to the lowest landing. He did not look at Mikhail. He looked at the kneeling clerk, and at the larger plain coat, and at the boat. "Stand down," he said to the plain coat, "by order of the Royal Guard of Harrowmere." The plain coat looked past him at Ostrin. "Captain, the arrangement nomen is rescinded," Ostrin said. His voice was the voice of a man who had not slept. "Step off the dock, both of you, now." They stepped off. Pell knelt by the clerk and lifted the sacking and cut the binding with a small clean motion and put his own cloak around the man's shoulders. "Master Raint, you are under the protection of the guard. Hask will take you to the warder's lodge." "Sergeant," the clerk said, and his voice broke. "Sergeant Pell, the young one. I know. He would not. I know." Hask lifted Raint to his feet, careful as if he were lifting his own father. Donray took the larger plain coat by the elbow without unkindness and led him up. The 8 unnamed men of the duty room formed 2 files on the stair and stood like a wall of red wool between the dock and the world. Mikhail had not moved. He still had his hand on his hilt. He realized, somewhere far behind his face, that he was shaking, and he made himself stop. Captain Ostrin came down to him. The captain stopped 2 paces away. He looked at Mikhail a long time. He looked, particularly, at Mikhail's hand on his hilt, and the white glove on it, and the rein on the brass of the buckle. "Guardsman Vale." "Sir, you disobeyed a written order in my hand and seal." "Yes, sir." "State your grounds." "The order was unlawful, sir. The Royal Guard does not put bound men on boats without a writ. I was sent because I was 3 weeks sworn. I will not be the man you needed me to be, sir." Ostrin closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, and he did not pretend otherwise. "No," he said, "you are not." He took the folded paper from Mikhail's cuff with his own hand. He held it over the lantern flame. It caught and curled. He let it fall into the river. The river took it without sound. "Sergeant Pell," Ostrin said. "Sir." "Enter on the watch roll." Guardsman Vile refused an unlawful order at the 3rd bell. Held the Wren stair against 2 men. Recovered the person of Master Raint of the audit alive. No man harmed beyond a bruised wrist. He paused. "And enter on my own line, Sergeant, that the captain of the Royal Guard of Harrowmere required this night." To be reminded by his newest sworn man of the oath, all of us took the day they put the cloak on us. Enter that as well. "Sir," Pell said softly. Ostrin turned to Mikhail. He did something then that Mikhail would, in the long quiet rest of his life, never quite know how to speak about. The captain of the Royal Guard of Harrowmere took off his right glove and offered his bare hand. Mikhail took it. "Welcome to the guard, lad," Ostrin said. They went up the Wren stair together, Captain, Sergeant, Hask, with the clerk on his arm, Donray with the prisoner, the 8 unnamed men, and the 3rd son of a country knight from the Chalk Hills who, 3 weeks before, had ridden south for a place at a barracks of brothers, and had, on a whetstone landing, at the 3rd bell, found at last what the older men had meant when they would not meet his eye. In the duty room there was a bowl of something hot and a chair pulled out. No one spoke of the stair. No one needed to. Word of the Wren stair did not travel the corridors in voices. It traveled the way real things travel inside a corps that has decided to keep them, in small returned courtesies. The gate-master who had never returned Mikhail's good morning returned it. The kitchen woman who had never looked up from her pot lifted her chin and gave him a nod that was almost a salute. In the records corridor, Master Raint passed him with a dignified blankness, and only the smallest shift of his eyes, the look a saved man gives the one who saved him when the saving must not be spoken of. In the duty room itself the change was quieter. Hask, who had not met his eyes in 3 weeks, met them now whenever he came through the door. Donray offered him the small daily things he had never offered before. A clean rag for his brass. The good seat at the long table, none of it was named. In the morning Hask sat down across from Mikhail at breakfast, and pushed a second piece of bread across the table without looking up. Donray, 2 seats away, set a small cup of black tea by his plate. lapel, at the head of the table, said only, "Eat, brother Veo," and the word brother was the only ceremony any of them ever made of it. Mikhail ate his bread and drank his tea, and did not say anything either. He had ridden south 3 weeks before to find a place at a barracks of brothers. He had not understood, then, that brothers were not something you arrived to. They were something you became. One wet landing and one refused order at a time, and the cost of becoming was the only ceremony that mattered. Outside, the rain had stopped. The bearskin stood on its peg by the door, drying. The cloak hung beside it, the red wool dark at the hem where the river had touched it. It would always be dark there. He did not mind.